critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's. Flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse, he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns.
Folks are starting their descent to Seattle. Seatbelt sign lights go back up. Last couple of return to their seats with us, their seatbelts are up. And we're flying on our arrival into Seattle. Those of you on the other side of the aircraft get the best view going way down south. And then coming up here on our left here shortly is going to be Mount St. Helens as we're coming into Seattle. Thought I have a nice view of Mount Rainier.
Hey everyone, Jake Casella here. Not doing a book this time. Last week I was in Seattle for the World Science Fiction Convention, so I'm trying my hand at another one of these con and travel reporting episodes. So if you happen to not know, the World Science Fiction Convention, it's a big gathering for fans and creators of science fiction, fantasy, and related speculative fiction categories. It's not nearly as massive as some of the Comic Cons and similar popular media conventions, but it is sort of the biggest in its bracket of fanish, majority but not exclusively literary conventions. It goes back to 1939, it moves around to different locations every year, it's entirely volunteer run, and the members of the Worldcon are the people who nominate and vote for the Hugo Awards. I have been to a couple of Worldcons in person and a couple online. I've always wanted to visit Seattle, and this year I was extra glad I was able to go, because both A Meal of Thorns and the Ancillary Review of Books were finalists for Hugos. Spoiler, we didn't win, but it was still very fun. And I also got to do a little bit of hiking in Olympic National Park beforehand, which is something I've been wanting to do for a while. This episode, I'm going to try to piece together a bit of what the convention was like, for me anyway. One of the things that really jumped out at me this trip is how much Worldcon is really kind of a superposition of cons. There are very different things going on for different people, and they're only sort of overlapping. Within the slice of the convention I was paying attention to, I was particularly interested in the focus on speculative poetry this year, and I got to sit down with Seattle's poet laureate, Brandon O'Brien, to talk about that. One of the reasons I'm interested is because I'm currently part of a group looking into proposing a new Hugo Award category for translated speculative fiction, so it's been informative to look at the thinking and the success of the Speculative Poetry Initiative. I went to some good panels, I got to be on some good panels. The biggest highlight for me was meeting lots of folks I've known online, sometimes for years, including some great folks who have worked on Ancillary or have guested here on the podcast. And of course, I met lots of new folks. And one of the things I wanted to do for this episode was talk to someone who was at Worldcon for the first time. Stick around for that conversation a little bit. But before going to Worldcon, I wanted to talk to one of the conrunners about what their perspective has been like, behind the curtain. And one of their department heads was kind enough to answer some questions via Zoom. Thanks so much for meeting and talking with me. Who are you, and what's your involvement with this year's Worldcon?
I'm Kevin Black. I'm the division head for publications for Seattle Worldcon 2025. So I'm part of the division head team, there's 11 division heads that work under the chair of the convention. But I'm also one of the people who was here at the very beginning, when we were a bit of 6 people, 8 years ago, which was a whole different thing. Everything was all hands on deck and everyone did a little bit of everything. I negotiated our contracts with the convention center and the hotels. And then I didn't want to get stuck just doing facilities. So I helped recruit someone else to take that over and went into publications, which is kind of more my jam, and it helps me support my wife, Sunny Jim, who's the division head for program, because she makes content and I put it out there in many, many different forms.
Tell me a little bit about what is being head of publications. What does that entail? What all are you putting out there in the world?
It's much more vast than I possibly could have imagined. I think I have 19 areas under me and over 50 staff.
Wow.
So we have a lot of different publications. Some of them are the obvious ones, that we actually print on paper. We have the souvenir program book. We have a pocket program. We've got a restaurant guide, but it also includes, for our Worldcon anyway, it includes the website, it includes social media, signs, and the press office, which has been a lot of our late focus when we're like a week out here. We have a newsletter. We've had a blog, the Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow blog, which we
Mm-hmm.
just wrapped up yesterday with a sign-off post after publishing 116 different columns,
Wow.
between 2 and 3 per week,
Uh-huh.
on average for the last 50 weeks, just to promote the Worldcon and also just get some fan ack out there and spread the word about both Seattle and traditions in Seattle, but also about classic science fiction because we're themed around we have sort of a retro theme. Our theme is building yesterday's future for everyone, sort of themed off of the 1962 Century 21 exposition, which was the World's Fair in Seattle, which
Okay.
they built the monorail and the Space Needle and had a big thing in the 60s to show the world what the 21st century would look like. And
Mm.
that was just 9 months. The World's Fair opened just 9 months after the first Seattle Worldcon in 1961, which was called SeaCon.
Okay.
And then there's been like I think 3 different crews have tried to bid for a Worldcon in Seattle since then, and they all failed for one reason or another.
Mm.
And we're the ones who get to do it in 2025, 64 years later.
For folks that don't know much about how Worldcon works, what like are the broad outlines of how the bid process works? How did you get involved? What does that look like?
So Worldcon, of course, moves around to different cities every year, and Worldcon is completely, entirely volunteer run. Absolutely nobody gets a salary. In fact, we pay. We all buy memberships to go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, formally, there's a site selection process. The members of each Worldcon vote for the location where the Worldcon will be held in 2 years. So this year, they'll be voting for the location of the Worldcon in 2027. There's a team that's bidding Montreal, and they're currently unopposed, so they will probably win. But years before that site selection vote, you put together a bid and you sort of campaign. You go to different conventions, you get to know the community, you let the community get to know you. Hopefully, they get some faith in your organizing skills,
Mm-hmm.
fundraising skills. One of the ways that we campaigned was to volunteer for other conventions. But it's interesting, Worldcon has only been in the Pacific Northwest 3 times in its history. The 1961 Worldcon in Seattle, there
Mm-hmm.
was a 1950 Worldcon in Portland, even earlier. And then after that, the only other Worldcon in the Pacific Northwest was 2015, which was in Spokane. And that actually happened after there was a crew that was trying to bid Seattle in 2011. After that bid collapsed, they sort of pivoted and ended up doing Spokane in
Okay.
2015.
Huh.
But the core members of our team went to our first Worldcon in Spokane in 2015. Worldcon is a huge staff. We're like 500-person staff, and we come from all over. I think the people who were here at the very beginning were all convention runners for Norwestcon. Norwestcon is a large regional that happens in the SeaTac area, and it's a 2,000, 2,400 person convention, generally science fiction convention. And that actually started as a test con for the 1980, it was either 81 or 82 Worldcon. There was a bid to have that in Seattle, and the people
Okay.
bidding for that started Norwestcon. They ended up losing that bid to Denver. And Norwestcon is still running. It's going to be in its 48th installment next year.
Okay. Wow.
Um, but yeah, so we'd all been running. I've been a staff person at Norwestcon for 20 years. We went to our first Worldcon in 2015. Our chair, Kathy Bond, immediately as soon as closing ceremonies ended for Sasquatch, she started talking about we're going to do Worldcon in Seattle
Yeah,
next.
yeah,
And I think it took about a year and a half for me to really get on that train. It was like, okay, Kathy, sure we will. But about a year and a half later, maybe some 2017, I jumped in, and my wife, Sunny Jim, came with me. And we were sort of early on, we were just like a 4 or 6 person bid committee.
yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
then, it's just been growth.
Am I remembering correctly? You were involved in ChiCon, right?
I had a staff role in ChiCon. I was the editor of the Pocket program.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I was involved in ChiCon, and of course, there's just so many names, and you don't see everyone in
yeah.
person. But nice to see you again. I'm sure I ran into you at some point. So
Nice to see you. I did.
yeah.
I intentionally did a pre-con job for that because I knew I'd be spending most of my time at the bid table and promoting the
Oh,
bid.
yeah, yeah.
Somebody has to do that while
Mm-hmm.
others of us had more responsible jobs for that. I mean, it was pretty responsible. I put together the program grid that people were using to navigate
Hmm.
around, and also the worked with the designer to create the content for the Pocket program, which ended up because of budget reasons, it ended up being only electronic, which is why having the program grid on paper was helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, handy. I know it's been nice to go over all these apps, but a lot of times when I'm at a convention, I still just kind of wish I had something to just look at, without having to like update something. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, that's been under my purview as the director of programs. So we did print, I think we only printed about 800 Pocket programs.
Okay.
But we do have them for people who want them. They got locked. They got locked on July 11th because of printing reasons, and there have been a lot of changes since then. So the most accurate version is going to be either on the website or on the mobile app, which is called Guidebook. But for those who want a grid, or
Hmm.
for those who want the flip book, that's going to be available too. And we've done a lot of graphic design that's been under my department as well, and we just really leaned into it. I mean, I've had the feeling from the beginning, look, it's a Worldcon, and it's been 60 years
Hmm.
for Seattle, so let's just leave everything on the field and make it the most. Let's just do everything. Let's go big.
Cool.
Why do it if no, not go big? So we did a ton of graphic design. We'll see a lot of, maybe you've seen, we've been sticking, we've got a pretty strong style manual as far as our colors and our fonts and our logo and stuff, and we've created logos for tons of different departments. The and I think there'll be a lot of design confronting everybody wherever they go within the convention center.
Anything about the upcoming Worldcon in Seattle that you think has gone particularly well, or that you're like particularly excited about for this one? So that's part one, and then second part is like, knowing how cons and Worldcons work, being involved in a lot of them. What are things you've been working on improving, and that you're hoping that future cons like continue improving on?
Oh wow. I mean, those are big
Big
questions.
questions. Yeah.
Those are big questions, and you're asking the director of publications. So what am I excited for? I'm excited to really finish up our mobile app
Uh
guidebook,
huh.
which not only does it list the schedule, but it also has lists for art show and dealer's room. It shows when people are panelists, they're also in the art show. Some people are actually in all three places, shows all those connections.
Hmm.
You'll click on a location, it'll pull up the map, which shows you exactly where the person is. I'm really excited to get that, finished, fully implemented.
Cool.
I'm excited for people to see our souvenir program book, which is gorgeous.
Mm.
I think our designer was going for a Pulitzer Prize or something. We've got, we decided to use the real estate, not so much to print boilerplate kinds of things that you can also read about on the internet, but we actually, we're reprinting, I think, I'm going to get the number wrong, but I think we're reprinting. We have like 18 poetry reprints because we have
Oh,
an
okay.
emphasis on speculative poetry this
Uh huh.
year.
Right.
We've got a reprint of a story by Nisi Shaw, and a lecture by Martha Wells. We recruited good people to write introductions. We've got Nora Jemison wrote an appreciation of Martha Wells, which is in the front of the book. Um, and it's just full of art. We wanted to be full of literature, poetry, and art, and I
Cool.
think it is. Looking forward to having people see that. But as far as other things, I mean, there's lots of things that our Worldcon is innovating on that I hope that people will pay attention to and carry
Mm.
forward.
Do you? I don't know if you know this officially, but do you know like roughly what the attendee is predicted to be like for this year?
There is a estimate somewhere. I haven't looked at it in a while, and I'm not sure if it's been updated. The estimate of attending, full attending 5-day memberships was something north of 55,400,
Oh,
but
great.
that
Okay.
might be updated. It might be more than that, and that isn't counting the walk up, and I might be counting the walk up, but it's not counting day passes, people who just buy a pass for one or more days.
Yeah. Okay.
So, with that, I would not be surprised to see us with a number that rounds to 6,000. Yeah, which is big. That would be that'll actually be, if it holds true, it'll be one of the biggest World Cons in the United States in the last 20, 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really big
Yeah,
compared to the numbers I've seen. That's great.
yeah.
thank you so much for your time meeting with me here. I am also scrambling around to get ready to head out west. So hoping the con goes really well, and I hope to catch you in the hallways there somewhere.
Yeah, right. Yeah, say hello. Absolutely.
So those little whistles and clicks you heard are barnacles and shellfish, and maybe some anemones. I don't know if anemones make any noise, actually. Since we were making a huge trip to the opposite side of the country and were hikers, my wife Allison and I were able to carve out a couple days before the convention to check out the Pacific Northwest a little bit. Poking around rocky beaches at low tide was definitely one of the highlights of the trip for me. Lots of weird little critters. Our big goal was to do at least a couple quick hikes in Olympic. And when I was setting up the trip and finding us a place to stay that was in easy reach of a few good locations, something about the name of the place where we were staying, it was itching something in the back of my brain. And it didn't quite click for a minute. And then it did.
In the state of Washington, under a near constant cover of clouds and rain, there's a small town named Forks. Population, 3,120 people. This is where I'm moving.
Oh my gosh, you guys. So much Twilight stuff in Forks. It's really kind of amazing that it's still going so strong. We saw some elk. We saw Bella's truck. It's a nice little spot. And also, if you find yourself out in Forks, you absolutely need to check out John's Beachcombing Museum. Best $5 I've spent in a while. It's this big converted garage full of about half a century of beachcombing finds. It sounds funny, and it is kind of funny, but it was also really well put together, and it had some surprisingly emotional turns between the collections of messages and bottles he's recovered and the part of the museum set aside for Flotsam from the 2011 Tohoku tsunami. There's a really great short documentary about John Anderson and his beachcombing collection. I'll put that in the notes. Otherwise, just did some great hiking. Nothing too exciting to recount, but real nice. Lots of moss, lots of waterfalls, lots of extremely big trees. The most exciting audio I got was some crows being cryptic, some squirrels cursing, and this small bird yelling at me. Then we packed up the hiking gear, headed back inland, and took a ferry back over to Seattle. Had a bit of a mad dash getting everything squared away, and then headed over to the Seattle Convention Center.
Block sign is on. Crossing Pine Street. Block sign is on.
The Seattle Convention Center has multiple buildings, but we were in just one of them, the Summit, and it was enormous. But surprisingly convenient, I thought anyway. It's just basically a giant cube, but very open and airy feeling, very hard to get lost in. And although I did wind up covering a lot of distance moving between things, it didn't really feel like the kind of labyrinthine expeditions like I've experienced even at some smaller conventions. Something I really liked about the Seattle location was how many chill-out spaces there were. There were big hallways with lots of windows and seating. There were lots of little open courtyards, lots of like railings where you could lean or grab a seat. Whenever I walked out of a panel, it felt really easy to find a spot to get away and kind of recollect myself for a second. And it felt equally easy to keep a conversation going, even if it was, 3 people, 5 people or something like that, and move it to like a convenient side space. So thumbs up on that. Having a full half hour in between program items is also something I really appreciate for those kinds of reasons. As a program participant and audience member, 2 somewhat contradictory observations. First, the con-running team felt kind of invisible. I didn't see techs running around or people giving 5-minute warnings to panels, anything like that. But, second observation, I don't think that mattered all that much because everything seemed to run pretty smoothly as far as I could tell. It was a big con. I wasn't everywhere. I'm sure there were snafus and problems somewhere. But honestly, for the things I went to, it was all pretty fine. I saw some cool panels. A good one on Sunday about language in SF. A slew of extremely good ones about weird fiction from Latin American and Global South writers. I was disappointed there weren't more program items explicitly about criticism and reviewing. Given, this sort of boom we're in right now for speculative criticism, and given the large number of finalists for various Hugo categories that are critics or criticism of one kind or another, so it's a bit of a bummer. But there were a lot of good critics and critical commentary on some of the panels regardless. Oh, also, I do want to mention, I don't know if you know the game Spot the Spook, where you try to identify the defense or espionage-connected person on the panel, but I checked off mine on the very first panel I went to. We probably need to add Spot the AI Grifter to that game as well. But good news, they may sometimes be the same person. I moderated one panel, Alternate Cognitions, which was on non-human intelligence and neurodivergence in SF, which was lots of fun. The panelists brought a lot of really great stuff to the table. And thanks to the audience, by the way, for packing the room at 9 a.m. Attendance seemed great at every panel I went to. Even when it looked a little empty at first in the bigger rooms, it was usually a bare minimum of 60 or so people by the time I got a count, and a lot of the rooms were filled. One of my goals for the trip was to grab an interview with a first-time Worldconner, and I lucked out with the Alternate Cognitions panel. Dr. Caitlin Casimo agreed to sit down with me a bit later to chat about her first impressions and also science. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you because I was hoping for the podcast to talk to someone, A, who knows things, and you know some things, and B, it's your first Worldcon.
It is my first Worldcon.
Yeah.
It's not my first con, but it is my first Worldcon.
So who are you?
I am Dr. Caitlin Casimo. I am a neuroscientist, science communicator, and theater nerd.
You said this is not your first con.
This is not my first con, but it is my first Worldcon.
What's your, do you have a home con? Do you have a normal con?
I do not, well, I mean, the Society for Neuroscience, but I don't think that's really what you're asking.
Not quite the same. Their cosplay's not as,
No.
Yeah.
It is a lot of the same people, and it actually does have a quite similar feel in that it's a bunch of people who have come together to learn about something specific, who are really passionate about it. The difference between a con versus a science convention or a conference is science conferences don't have fans in the same way. So that, and I am both in the seat of being a science professional who knows things about the arts and of being a fan. So that is an interesting difference.
Oh, that's cool. So how did you decide to come here? How did you decide to be on paneling? What's the process been like for you?
I don't remember how I found out that it was going to be here in Seattle, but as soon as I found out, I was like, I'm going. This is happening. I knew what Worldcon was. I knew what the Hugo Awards were. I've been reading the winners for years. And then as I was like poking around the website to like find out about like, oh, what's the schedule going to be like? What do I need to know? This was in probably January or so, that they had the information sign up to be a panelist. And I was like, well, I know things about science, and I know things about science fiction, and I know things about the arts, so I'm going to put my name in to see where that goes, if anywhere, and here I am.
Very cool. Yeah. So we're at, what is this day 3? Is that right?
Four.
Like
Day 4.
Day 4. Oh my gosh, I've completely lost track of time while I'm here. I'm actually glad that I went back. Because if I trusted my gut, I would say it's like day 8 because it's just been so much. But what have been some highlights or lowlights? What's your experience been like thus far?
Okay, I promise I'm not just saying this, but the panel that you just moderated that I was on truly was the highlight. Like, I felt like it was a really balanced discussion. It was a subject area that I care a lot about. The audience seemed really engaged. I just had such a good experience with that because it was both getting to connect with the other panelists about something that we all really cared about and getting to connect with the audience about something that they were clearly enjoying that conversation. So I would say that's been the highlight so far.
Yeah,
and the low light was that it rained yesterday.
Yeah.
It's summer. It's not supposed to rain, even
really?
here in Seattle.
Okay. I enjoyed it because that was my first like Seattle rain experience.
Yeah.
So I was like, I have to get it. Like I saw the gum wall, I got rained on, so I've got the basic Seattle.
And that was pretty typical Seattle rain, that it's like just kind of hanging in the air. It's why nobody uses umbrellas here, because they don't help. The rain doesn't come down. It just sits.
It's just there. You walk through the rain.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. But yeah, I really enjoyed the panel as well. And it was making me think about, I think there's a tendency when you go to a lot of cons, when you talk about cons a lot, there's a tendency to kind of focus on the negatives, and Worldcon like famously always has like scandals and things that go wrong. But one of the things I was thinking about from that panel was at other literary conventions that aren't science fiction based, we don't have like that sort of door open and connection to the sciences.
Yeah.
Which I just think is really fascinating to think about. Like it is a literary arts con, but we do want input and knowledge from people like you.
I really appreciate that. I had only more recently come to realize that Worldcon is, if not unique, then certainly not the norm in that. And that is a big focus of my work in the arts and in science communication, and in the intersection of the arts and science communication, because a lot of my science communication efforts are informed by my background in theater, is that the scientists are over here doing their thing, and the artists are over here doing their thing, and it means that either we get art that is trying its best to depict science, but doesn't have the insider view, even if it's 100%, with the world's biggest air quotes, accurate, that isn't necessarily the most important thing to portray. And then the scientists are over here often struggling with their communication skills in a way that artists can really help with. So I think that is a really fruitful area to be sitting at the intersection of, and I wish there was more of it.
So tell me a little bit about what your role is right now. Like, what do you do right now?
I wear a lot of hats. So my regular job is that I lead the education program at the Allen Institute, which is a biomedical sciences research institute just up the road from the Seattle Convention Center. It's a research organization, so it doesn't have students, it doesn't grant degrees. It just does research. And that in the education program, we do not grant degrees to students. We work with students, educators, scientists, and the public, primarily our local community here in Seattle, to help them get excited about science, and especially because the Allen Institute practices open science, which is sharing data, tools, physical lab resources like cell lines and mice openly for other scientists to use in their research, but also that we use it in learning situations, like with students and faculty, to help them have authentic science experiences without needing access to a lab, to develop their data literacy and their data science skills, to develop their computational biology understanding, which is different from data science. And that is the future of biology. So we are able to use these digital resources to help lower barriers to entry to career experiences, to learning, and also to prepare the next generation of professionals, but also to help prepare the next generation of our fellow people who live in society. That there's a lot of value in people feeling comfortable with assessing data, making an argument from evidence, et cetera, without themselves being scientists.
Who are the people you talk to a lot, like the outside people that you're providing this education to? What's that demographic like?
Our biggest demographics are people who teach undergraduates. Primarily people who teach biomedical sciences to the undergraduates, people who teach high school students, and also the high school students and undergrads themselves, mainly through their educator. So like we have a field trip program, and then like the teacher will apply to bring their class. But also we have, I'm very excited, this is going to be our third year of doing a public outreach event called BrainFest at the local science museum, which is called Pacific Science Center. It's one of our biggest things of the whole year, where we do a whole day worth of neuroscience activities to help bring people in to feeling like a scientist, and it's just right here and anyone can come.
So as Caitlin mentioned, in addition to traditional panels, Worldcon also hosts scientists for various presentations. There's also an academic track of more traditional humanities-style papers, and honestly, there are huge swaths of the convention that I didn't have time to check out, including gaming, folk music, is that redundant? Like chai latte? Stuff about costuming, lots of different hobbies and specific focuses have their own sort of tracks within Worldcon. Foci, I should say. I really didn't get a chance to check out the party scene or BarCon, which many people will tell you is the real con. That's the curse of being an extreme morning person who's also not that into social drinking, who was also set 3 hours earlier by being on the West Coast. I did, however, manage to catch a poetry reading hosted by Interstellar Flight Press at the Seattle Beer Company, and I had a nice dark lager, arguably socially, and they had a featured reader who I was lucky enough to interview later.
So I'm just very excited to be the first poet laureate. I think that it's really exciting to be in a place where people are recognizing poetry more and more.
So this is Brandon O'Brien, who's a poet, writer, editor, and game designer. He's won the Elgin Award, among other honors. Brandon was part of the effort that got the speculative poetry Hugo on the ballot and was hugely involved in promoting poets and poetry at the Seattle Worldcon.
I think poetry has been having a moment very recently. Speculative poetry is doing so many radical things, has been doing so many radical things for quite some time, and being in a position where we can now see what it potentially looks like to recognize that, not just with the first poet laureate, who I am very glad to have this opportunity, but I definitely hope that I'm not the last, but also with the special category for Best Poem at this year's Hugo Awards, which I hope makes an impact and proves to other people that poetry is genuinely being valued and that we can make it permanent, which is a thing that very many poets in this space desperately want to happen. Because I do think that poetry is not just fundamentally part of the genre, like no matter what, it deserves its respect as part of the genre, but we also underestimate that in a lot of ways it is the precursor to our understanding of genre, that the first texts that we consider classical examples of what still holds in genre were all epic poems, the Iliad, the Odyssey. It obviously also means something to be able to point out that contemporary speculative poetry is doing so many of the exact same challenging things that prose is doing, that people are writing complex, deeply intense poems about race and class and technology and power in our real world, using the exact same language that prose is using, or sometimes even more intense and complex metaphor, in ways that if we not only just encourage people to value it more, but just encourage people to read it more, to consider it as a more regular element of their literary diet, it will continue to expand the way that we think of what the speculative can do or even must do in the world as a tool to help us challenge our preconceptions about the world and how we can make it better.
Yeah, oh, that's great. That's wonderful. So I know usually, I don't say usually, but a lot of Worldcons I've been to, I'll see one or two panels that have something to do with spec poetry, but there's a great lineup this year. I was wondering, like, what highlights have been for you with, like, this kind of new focus on it this year?
Well, it would be remiss of me not to mention that I'm always delighted to be able to host a speculative open mic every year. The Speculative Poetry Initiative literally added to their proposal statistics of every poetry event that has ever been at a Worldcon since past panel content has been recorded. Yeah. And it is noteworthy to me, not only that, as you say, there's often a heavy drought of poetry content, but that before my first speculative open mic at my first Worldcon in Helsinki in 2017, there was only one open mic, non-primarily speculative poetry open mic at a Worldcon. It was 7 years before that. Okay. And before that, there was, I can only presume, either things that was happening off the grid or nothing was happening at all. And being in a position where one of the things that I can give to a Worldcon is space for people who have never read before, just written poetry very recently, have no idea what their work sounds like. Gets the opportunity to share that with other people is a thing that I enjoy a great deal. What I enjoy about this year's Worldcon in particular is, whereas at other Worldcons I've seen there'll be one group reading of a group of poets, there's been one every day at this convention to give as many poets as possible the opportunity to be able to read. I'm not only excited by the wealth of panel content that we've had this year as well, but those panels have also given themselves room to be complex. They're not just the 101, what is speculative poetry anymore. We're now talking about form. We're now talking about what poetry has specifically done to start conversations about specific topics. We're talking about how to get into self-publishing, because being a poet is like one of the hardest spaces to break through. There are no agent spots. Most of the publishing houses that publish speculative poetry, that's either their primary bag or something that is minor compared to their other content. So being able to answer questions about getting into the industry as well is also very useful. So I feel like while there's still a long way to go, while I acknowledge that a lot of the difficulties in getting even more content is obviously about who can be available at a Worldcon as well, I'm very glad that we can see that amount of content grow and see that amount of content be more complex. And I'm looking forward to the point where, even though I don't think we're ever going to get to that number, it would be nice to see the number of poetry panels at a con come close to like fan writing content, or even like just at the bottom of, like, let's see where the glass ceiling of speculative poetry content compared to short story content can be in spaces like these, so people can feel more encouraged to actually explore it. And I will also say that I'm also very excited that the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association had a writing workshop this year as well. And a handful of people who came to the open mic afterward were people who had written something at that workshop.
Okay,
so
cool.
that loop of inspiration, I hope, continues as well in the future.
Yeah. So kind of a, I don't know, maybe a vague question, but something I've been thinking about, seeing how much poetry is being read here. You know, I came down to the Seattle Beer Company for the Interstellar
Yes.
Flight Press reading, which was really fun. And it's been making me think a little bit about how in science fiction fandom spaces that include writers, like we do readings, right? And people read a little bit from a short story, or they'll read novels. But to me, they'll read an excerpt from a novel. But to me, it feels like there's something really different and really vital in terms of the tradition and the communities of poetry readings, where there's like, obviously there's shorter work, so there's more chance for people to get up there and do a complete thing and get feedback right away. And I was just kind of wondering how you see that sort of like, you know, vocal standing up energy intersecting with science fiction fandom, because it seems like there's this, I don't know, there's interesting energy there that I've just been thinking about.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I think about reading a lot. Before I got into speculative poetry, I was primarily in spoken word. So I'm familiar with slam spaces, I'm familiar with open mic spaces. One of the obvious things about poetry readings is you are reading a complete object. You know every beat of this thing already, and it's meant to last 5 to 6 minutes. At its possible longest. If you are a skilled performer, if you are talented at reading, it's very easy to never miss an emotive beat in that space, to always be on while you're reading, in ways that I think people who are accustomed to reading, people who are writing prose and either accustomed to reading prose or not accustomed to reading at all, would strongly benefit from. I think encouraging people to discover more performability in their work is obviously very vital, and that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of prose fiction writers should also write poetry. Even if you're not getting to publish, even if that's not your primary concern, I think being in the space of getting accustomed to writing and getting accustomed to the fact that whatever you write is an act of performance because someone's reading your work aloud anyway is really, really valuable. So I feel like more writers should, even just as an exercise, be in the business of thinking about performance in their writing, and that poetry can help them do that. Because like in most of the panels that I've ever been to about reading your work aloud, it is almost always an audience of people who do not write poetry. I was literally just at a panel like this at the Gen Con Writers Symposium 2 weeks before, where the majority of the audience were people who were short fiction writers or novelists who want to get accustomed to reading aloud. And the panel is all poets, people who have at least written and read poetry at least once in their career. And I'm like, maybe the skill we're trying to tell you is write more poetry as well. Also because readings are vital to the con space. Readings are where people who have never heard this author before get the smallest taste of what their work looks like before they go back down to the dealer's hall and buy a book. Short of just looking at the cover. This is the opportunity to know what's inside. And a lot of readers, I think, overestimate every person's capacity to read. And a lot of writers underestimate the obvious importance of going, if I'm selling this to someone, I need to perform it at its best. So I need to be thinking performatively. I'm not even telling everybody you need to go to an acting class or you need to get into spoken word slam or something like that. But being more accustomed to reading and discovering voice is a thing that, because I think poetry lends itself to that very easily for a lot of people. I think getting accustomed to poetry in that exact same space and as part of your writing diet is also very important for bridging that gap and getting you more accustomed to, well, what does this sound like? What is the emphasis I need to place here? How do I deliver the best possible voice for each individual line, each individual phrase in this section of whatever it is I'm reading?
in the circles of like critics and reviewers that I kind of run in, we're always talking about how like we want more focus on style, and right, because in speculative fiction it's so easy to focus on the idea, right? Like what's the big thing, the big outlandish thing, the alien, the robot, whatever. But we're like, but what you're reading is sentences, and sentences have a sound. And like once you're thinking about what things sound like out loud, that's such a huge chunk of what style is. And you can't avoid that with poetry, which I think is something I'm excited about seeing more focus on that in these spaces.
No, yeah, and the thing is too, and this is a thought that I've had a while ago, that when people talk about voice, they think that they mean two different things based on form, but they don't. Because I think a lot of fiction writers are accustomed to the idea that voice is a thing that happens in the head. That when you write your beautiful sentence and the reader reads it, they're really just having an experience of that sound that is purely mental as a result of like the craft of putting the words on the paper. But that's all abstract. Words gain their style in the mouth. People are hearing what you're saying. And if you can't say it the way that they hear it, you have created a disconnect for them because they either believe that you're saying your words wrong, which is very funny, or that you're saying your words correctly and therefore the more idealized image of how your words sound in their head has now been broken for them because they're like, oh, this is actually meant to sound dull and unentertaining. And this is not me disparaging anybody, but like your goal is to sell the work. Reading is selling the work all the time. And if you're not accustomed to thinking not just about the act of reading as the act of marketing your style, but the act of reading as getting accustomed to your own style, getting accustomed to your own voice, discovering what you're very good at, what you're very bad at, and honing in on the things that you know you really like and are actually holding readers. If none of those things are capturing you in the act of just reading your own work aloud, it's not going to capture someone else, because that someone else is either reading your own work aloud or is trying to hear your voice in their head.
So this is me standing on the sidewalk outside the convention center, listening to this art installation called Summit Sound from the Jack Straw Cultural Center team. That song is Mole, performed by Elizabeth McQueen. I'll put a link to the project in the show notes. Also, while we're talking about art at the con, there was this extremely cool exhibit inside by Kate Clark called What You Have Become. There were these colored resin blocks of different sizes and shapes holding objects recovered from one block of Seattle. Very, very, very cool. I will also say this for the Seattle location. I really think it's the best I've ever seen for a convention or a conference, full stop. Downtown Seattle is small enough to get around relatively easily, and it's packed with eating and drinking options. Granted, they're at, downtown and somewhat touristy prices, but a lot of conferences and conventions I've been to are absolutely cursed in terms of nearby options. So it was very nice to wander around and find something good, especially as a vegetarian, and still have time to get back to a panel. Oh, and I found the gum wall by accident, which is more of a gum block at this point. And of course, I found coffee. So if you could just tell me where I am.
Yeah, you're at Olympia Coffee in Columbia City.
Cool. And what is this coffee that I'm about to have?
Yeah, it's the Kirimihiga. It's from Kenya.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
And what's your name?
I'm Elliot.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Okay, you've waited long enough. I know the real reason you're listening. You want the Seattle Worldcon coffee report. And listen, yes, I know Seattle's kind of one of the coffee capitals of the world, but it's complicated. I'll say this first. Most espressos are bad. Even at good shops, in classy locations, most espressos are bad. That's just true, at least 80-95% of the time. It's a tricky and unforgiving brewing method. Every espresso I had in Seattle was good. Not mind-blowing, not a god shot, not write it down in my little book and think about it occasionally, but good. Near perfect extractions, nice and balanced. And that is remarkable. That speaks to a chain from farms and roasters to shops and baristas that has been respected and studied all along the way. So good job there, Seattle, at least the shops I went to. I have to say, though, when I'm looking for a really exciting coffee, I'm usually looking for a filter coffee, a brew, a drip. And the tastes in Seattle famously run to dark roasts. So I did not have much luck until folks directed me to the Olympia shop in Columbia City. That Kenya was real good. But all said and done, as I get to the end of my travels for this extremely travel-filled season, for best coffee, Minneapolis has actually proved head and shoulders above every city I visited this year. No competition from Pike Place. But let's go back to the convention. I want to think about science fiction some more, and Caitlin had some more good thoughts.
Now, entering Westlake. Doors to my right.
I really liked what you said a second ago about the portrayal of science accurately not necessarily being the important thing in science fiction. I'm trying to think of a clever question about that. I guess what I'll say is I'll be like, say more about that.
So when I see science in fiction, to me there are three major facets, and this is not comprehensive. One is the science or technology, the STEM itself, which doesn't necessarily have to be accurate, because sometimes the idea is to make a point about the philosophy or the potential of the technology or the way it impacts our lives, and it doesn't have to accurately reflect what is truly currently or potentially possible in order to be a valuable commentary on that. The second is the portrayal of the scientific process. How do scientists think about assessing the evidence that we see and the world that we live in order to develop our understanding? And that, I think, is something that is underexplored. And that I don't see characters going on that journey. And then the third is probably the most fun, which is the portrayal of scientists as characters in stories. Science is full of personalities, and those are not always, in fact, I would say usually not, what people think of when they picture a scientist. Scientists have lives outside of lab. Scientists work in teams to do their work. They don't work by themselves very often. Scientists are often real-life sci-fi nerds. I've seen 5 of my colleagues here at this con. Cool. I think that's a missed opportunity for readers, viewers, whatever media it is, to be able to relate to scientists as people, which is a step towards being able to see themselves as a scientist, to see themselves as someone engaging in the scientific process.
I really dig that, because it's one of those things where the scientist as a character, like in film and in books, and they kind of do science solitarily, and that does take away that, like, there's actually a path towards this. There's very few books that I read where a long time ago I thought I was going to be a bio person, and there's very few books to me where I feel like I can kind of smell the lab, I can kind of like see the labels on things, and they feel like they get it. But I love those. Do you have any examples of ones that you like, that you think do a good job on any of those three axes?
Oh my gosh.
Doesn't have to be just the last one.
I'm gonna take the shortcut route out, and I'm gonna say among this year's Hugo nominees, I would say Alien Clay does a really good job of depicting science and scientists as like kind of a messy bunch. Like, it's a slow process. It's influenced by factors that are outside of the scientist's control. And it's also full of surprises that, spoilers, that over the course of the book, they realize that they're dealing with like the sort of emergent property of consciousness among the creatures on this planet. And they do so through huge trials and tribulations. Ultimately, it comes down to having to work as a team of people who have different specialties and to overcome the initial assumptions that they have. I just thought that was a really good demonstration of scientists' personalities, scientists having goals and objectives outside of their science. Like, those characters are also actively involved in a rebellion.
Right.
And also the science is really cool. I just thought those aliens were awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was a little dismayed at how easy it was to believe Lysenkoism as like a threat in like the year of our Lord 2024. That was. No, that's a good one. That's great. I mostly am just curious about your con experience. You've said some good stuff. Have you been on, what other panels have you been on?
I was on 3 panels here at Worldcon. I was on alternate cognitions. I was on, which is the one that we've been talking about. I was on That's Not How This Works, That's Not How Any of This Works, bad science and science fiction.
Fun.
Back to my point that like science doesn't have to be correct to be good, but also sometimes it can be so bad it takes you out of the story, and that's when it's a problem. The solution to that is go talk to a scientist, or just hand wave it, just don't get into it. The third one was, can biological research ever be independent? So it was about talking about real life biological research.
Independent from...
Well, that was a big part of the panel, was what does independence really mean anyway?
Interesting. Did you all solve the problem?
We did not.
No? Okay, all right, that's great. Great. Has there been anything kind of like surprising about how Worldcon works, or kind of like the vibe?
I didn't realize before I signed up for the con how many of these small writing workshops there were going to be that, they require pre-registration. They're marked in the program, but that it's almost a separate little side track.
Yeah.
And I've been able to do a few of those. I have one more that I'm doing this afternoon, and that's been really valuable. I have a lot of expertise in being a science fiction reader and in being a theater person, but I really have not done that much writing myself. A lot of my theater experience has been primarily in performance and directing, which means I'm working with something that somebody else wrote in order to draw out themes, to draw out character perspectives, but I'm not the one originating the narrative. And that but I've always been somebody who really values my creative side as well as my scientific side. That makes it sound like those are two different things. They're not. They're two different sides of the same coin. But that I'm at a point where I'm like ready to start diving into more of generating the narrative myself. And those have been really, really helpful.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's really cool. Yeah. One of the things I think a lot about at Worldcon is surely by size, it's easy to forget that it's almost not one thing. It's like 7 or 8 things that are kind of in the same space at the same time. But the writing is like this whole other thing that's going on the whole time. So.
Yeah. And it's been really helpful to be able to dip my toe into that in that context of it being one facet of a larger program that I have other things in it that I have more experience with.
That's very cool. Question I ask everyone. It can be recent, can be a bit ago, can be old, can be new. What have you read lately that's just been in your mind as like a cool thing to recommend?
Okay, I got to go to the spreadsheet.
All right, you have a spreadsheet. Excellent.
I have a spreadsheet.
Cool.
I just read, in preparation for the panel that we just did, I read The Mountain and the Sea. I had read Ray Naylor's nominee this year, The Tusk of Extinction, already. But I was like, if I'm going to be on this panel, this book has been on my radar, I'm going to read that. And that was really excellent. Cool. I thought the neuroscience was really thoughtful, and to my point about it not needing to be 100% accurate, it was very accurate, and that the places where it diverged from what could be extrapolated from current science were all in service of a really specific plot or thematic reason. So I thought that was really well done. Alien Clay has really stuck with me of all of the nominees this year. And then also, let's see, what else? Oh, I did the 99% Invisible read-along of The Power Broker.
Oh, okay.
That was
nice.
1,300 pages worth every second of it.
I live in Buffalo, New York, so we curse Moses' name every day.
Yeah, and deserved.
Wait.
I've mentioned the alternate cognitions panel I moderated that Caitlin was on. I also really enjoyed the 2 items I was a regular panelist for. One about the Torment Nexus, which ranged around a lot, but I thought was a lot of fun. And the other one that I was super worried about, but wound up being really, really good, was a panel discussing this year's Hugo novel finalists. I was worried about it because I've already done a fair amount of discussing them. There are a few on there that I'm not a fan of. And I think, with an exception or two, it's a pretty safe/weak list. I didn't really see the advantage to being publicly negative about the list at this stage. I really don't think there's much point trying to unenthuse a fan about something they like. I just don't see the point of that. But it wound up being a really great panel. I think we did a good job of stepping back and doing some meta commentary on what the list says about tastes and trends right now. We mentioned a bunch of other books that we would have loved to see on there. We wondered why some weren't. And we got to talk about what we're excited for next year. Oh, and I got to shout out the Translated Hugo Initiative and recommend a couple of speculative fiction works in translation that I think people should read. That was Saturday around noon, and after that I had to briefly collapse and then scramble around to get ready for the Hugos. Holy moly. The pre-ceremony reception was nice. I finally got to chat with some folks I've been wanting to find all con, including fellow podcasters. Seth from Hugos there, and Lori, Haley, and Amy from Hugo Girl. Hello, hope you're listening. And then the ceremony. Now, if you've been following the Hugos this year, you've probably seen a bit of this commentary already about the issues, the big one being that there were a lot of names mispronounced. Ancillary was literally the first finalist read, and our editors did not escape unscathed, despite the fact that we provided pronunciation. There were also just a lot of little ceremony hiccups, initially not reading a finalist name, not reading the Creo masthead. Some categories didn't get visual slides at all, that kind of thing. I'm not going to rehash it all here, just flagging that that was a thing. Lots more you can read about this if you want to. As many folks have pointed out, A, we as a fandom went nuclear about these issues in 2020. So why is it happening again? And B, these are solved issues. We know how to do this stuff properly. We've had multiple cons that have handled it just fine. Los Angeles, please take note. I have faith in you, but please notice it. Some people were also a little exasperated by the musical component of the ceremony, which was a song they modified and sang in between bits of the show. Now, personally, I am not much of a singer, but actually, I kind of dig doing a goofy communal thing for our goofy communal thing. That doesn't bother me. Modified songs are part of the Otherwise Awards ceremony at WisCon, and both of those are dear to my heart. I think they might have been an influence here. And again, personally, I probably wouldn't have picked a Disney/Marvel song to use, but, whatever. I probably wouldn't have picked one when it's a show from one of the finalists. I don't love the optics on that, but goofy communal thing didn't ultimately bother me. One thing that has been bothering me, optics-wise, the more I think about it, was the bit in the ceremony where a conrunner came out to shame one of the winners for not showing up or sending an acceptance speech. Now, this was for dramatic presentation long form, also known as film, a category I think should evaporate. And the shaming was done at least a little tongue-in-cheek, but this was done after the winner for the best fanzine didn't show up. And I can't help thinking, are we trying to shame them too? Are we voting for who's best in the field, or just voting for who's best in the field in the subset of people who will also show up to our goofy party? I don't know. I didn't love it. Overall, the ceremony was not a disaster or anything, and there were some wins that I was super glad about, but there were definitely some weird moments.
Down the Hugo Road, down the road, down the Hugo Road.
Yeah, what kind of things, like thinking ahead, like presumably as soon as you wrap up this one, you're going to pitch again, right? So like what are you thinking, like, next time I do this, here's what I'm going to do even better?
As soon as we wrap up this one, we're going to take a long nap.
This is Kevin Black again, one of the conrunners. One of the things I was particularly interested in talking to committee people about was what kinds of changes have they made and what kind of changes do they want to see? A lot of really important stuff that people are doing behind the scenes kind of gets overlooked. Sometimes there are big steps that are made and people don't really notice until it becomes a new standard.
We're going to owe some people favors, which means that a lot of us are probably going to get roped into working on the next couple Worldcons.
Uh-huh.
I mean, as far as things that we've innovated on, it goes from large to small. I mean, just in the publications area, because I'm a publications person, we went with a monthly newsletter instead of, Worldcons have traditionally done progress reports, which come quarterly, and they're like 40 to 60 pages long. Right. And I don't know who sat down and read, 45-page progress reports. I never did. So I was like, that's not so useful. Let's do a monthly newsletter, and they still get kind of long sometimes, but let's make it bite-sized and easy. So that was a small innovation that I felt good about. But one of the big innovations that we tried was a reduced rate membership. Mm-hmm. Just to try to be more inclusive. And we're the first ones to do this. We have a reduced rate membership, which has never increased since the time we started. It's $175. It's, that's still, I'd like it to be cheaper. It's $175. It's never gone up. The regular rate is now $300. And then to balance that out, there's a Friends of Worldcon rate, which is $500, which is just voluntary. People can voluntarily pay $500, and it helps to subsidize people who might be lower income, fixed income, lower means, or just, maybe they're just a little, they haven't been to a Worldcon before, and so
Right.
they're a little hesitant, and having a little bit of a lower price point will help bring them on board. And also there's a community fund for people for whom the $175 is a barrier, or the other costs of hotel and travel is a
Right.
barrier. They can apply to the community fund, and that's been well subscribed. So I'm really excited about that. I think that this community needs to bring new people in, and we do that by being welcoming. We do that by being accessible. We also do it by going to cities that we haven't been to before.
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure.
Icon 8 was great. That was the 8th Worldcon in Chicago, but coming back to Seattle after 64 years, I think is a big deal. It brings people in, just like Sasquatch brought us in. We should be looking for the cities that we've never been to before, or we haven't been for several generations, because there's a lot of cities on that list.
If you haven't seen the list of Hugo winners yet, check it out. A special shout out to Black Nerd Problems for Best Fanzine, and to 8 Days of Diana Wynne Jones for Best Fancast, which is indeed very, very good. None of my frontrunners made it for the fiction categories, which didn't surprise me that much, but it's still a good list. 2 big surprises for me were Best Related Work, going to Jordan S. Carroll's Speculative Whiteness, and Best Fan Writer, going to friend of the pod, Abigail Nussbaum. I was pulling for both of them, and I am extremely and pleasantly surprised that the award went to these 2. They're both outward-looking, culture-critiquing picks, rather than the inward-looking fanish stuff I thought might take it. Very, very cool. Also cool to see Indigenous writers win in 3 different categories. And we had our first Hugo for Best Poem, going to Mary Brennan. And Brandon O'Brien's speech introducing the award, by the way, was in verse, and I think it was itself an argument for the category. It was very good, very fun. So I have to admit that I've had some qualms about the speculative poetry category, and I have some qualms still. I'm just not a poetry person. It's not something that I follow as closely as I follow other kinds of literature. It's not something I feel like I get as much. And so when you add on the additional level of it being in genre, being speculative, I feel like I have an even harder time reading it or figuring out what it is. But that's kind of a me problem. And, seeing the energy around it at this Worldcon, it really went a long way towards changing my mind. There's a lot about reading and writing that lend themselves to solitude, to loneliness, to abstraction, to sort of like a disembodied approach to the practice. And seeing and hearing folks sharing poetry and getting jazzed about it, that combats that. And I think spotlighting that energy could be really good for the field. And at any rate, just like the cosplay and the gamers and the people who are really into movies, I guess, Worldcon and the Hugos have room for multiple fandoms. One of the things I was interested to talk to Brandon about is what he thinks can or should happen now that we have the category at least started. What are you excited for next? So the speculative poetry is there. Mm-hmm. It does have, I think it still needs to be ratified eventually, right?
Yes, the actual motion to get a Best Poem Hugo permanently in the Hugo Awards needs to be ratified. I know that the Speculative Poetry Initiative, being led by Holly Lynn Walrath and a bunch of other very stellar poets, are absolutely determined to continue rallying for this. They're literally talking about how they're going to spend what they can do to spend the rest of the next year talking about speculative poetry and keeping it in people's minds up until then. So I'm very excited about that. What I'm really hopeful for, and this is not a thing that you could put in the business meeting, but I hope that other conventions are catching on to it and will respond very quickly, is that I want there to be more poet laureates. I want there to be more opportunities for someone to be in the space continually championing poetry as part of the process. I know that there are people obviously working in the programming space to make sure that happens. I trust that LACon, for instance, will have a poetry track lead, or at least someone in the writing track who's responsible for shepherding poetry. But they need to be able to also pick essentially a spokesperson, somebody whose face can be on posters and on large screens somewhere, whose job it is to go, if you have missed a poetry thing, you can look for this person and know where the poetry is going to be. Because I think the thing that ultimately makes it very important in this space is guests of honor's jobs are to be spokespeople for the things that the convention values. It's why I like that Worldcon has scientists as their guests of honor, because we don't want to be inappropriate or improper about the way that we portray real science. I like that we include musicians as our guests of honor because it means that we value filk as part of our culture. We need to value poetry the exact same way, and that means we need to consider who are our spokespersons and give them opportunities to promote poetry in this space. I can literally make a list of people who deserve to be poet laureate at some point, and I want LACon, I want whoever picks up in 2028, I want whoever picks up in 2029 to like take that mantle and pass it on so someone is always championing poetry in the space.
There's probably a lot of people who come to Worldcon who are not as familiar with speculative poetry, and they're probably getting a lot more of it this time than usual because there's a lot of great programming going on for it. For listeners who are maybe like thinking about speculative poetry kind of for the first time, where are some venues, where are some books, who are some working places that you would point them towards to read some good stuff?
So this is actually a very easy question to answer because like a lot of short fiction, it is very easy to find speculative poetry online. And in fact, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association wants to make it so easy for you to find places to read poetry if you want to read poetry, and places where you can publish poetry if you are writing poetry, that there's literally a markets page on sfpoetry.org where you can just see all of the magazines that are presently still operating and have content online. Uncanny is a very strong space for that kind of work. Strange Horizons is a remarkably strong place for that kind of work. And both of those magazines not only will publish their content online for people to read, but literally also have an audio podcast where, if not the poet, very strong readers are reading the work aloud for you to hear. There are lots of very strong magazines in this space like Asimov's and Analog that have poetry available, but you need to subscribe in order to read them. Yeah. But that means that you also know that those places are very strongly curating their poetry as well. So like the easy answer to the question is go to sfpoetry.org, go to the markets page, and then just pick a site at random, see if it's online, and just start reading. There's a lot there, but also it would be remiss of me not to mention that one of the other easy ways to get a lot of poetry, especially poetry that would otherwise be unavailable because it would have been in an anthology somewhere or in a book that you haven't read yet, is to actually become a member of the SFPA, because even at the lowest possible tier of membership, the PDF tier for $15, you not only get access to the SFPA's journal Starline, but you also get access to the Rising Anthology every year, which is designed specifically for people to read all of the poetry that's available for the Rising Award and therefore vote. But that means that you're seeing the best of the best poetry that has been selected by other members from spaces that have published that poetry, including magazines, including anthologies. And you also get access to the voting packet for the Elgin Award, which means that you're reading the best anthologies and the best collections that have been presented as well. So you just get you are getting per capita more poetry than most people would if you join the SFPA, simply for the purposes of having more things to read. And that's also an invitation for you to be a part of the process of deciding what poetry stands out to fandom and shaping the way that we continue reading and evaluating poetry from years onward. So,
fantastic. Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's a really great answer. Last question that I ask everyone is, what have you read recently that you've been thinking about? New or old? Anything good that's been kind of on your mind a little bit?
So I don't want to seem biased when I say this, so I hope that this comes out after the Hugo ceremony is over. All of the finalists for the Best Poem Hugo have been really, really engaging. I love all of them for very different reasons. So I'm not mentioning this because I think that it's the absolute best in any specific element for that category. But Oliver Langmaid's Calypso obviously stands out to me, not only because I'm so excited that people are doing more novels in verse, but because there is so much strong theme taking place in Calypso, not just lyrically in its content, but even the way that it is laid out physically in the page feels like it is evoking theme, evoking voice very strongly to me, that I started reading it for voting and couldn't put it down in ways that I would be more patient with prose very often. But Calypso was captivating me so strongly that not only do I want to say that Oliver Langmead's work is standout and that you should read all of Oliver's work, but in my head, it is also conditioning me to go, I can't wait to see what future novels in verse look like in this space. How we can continually use verse as voice in as an opportunity to reevaluate what we think is the chapter of a novel, what we think of is the first page of a novel. Like, how can we be more complicated about the ways in which we delineate space in what would otherwise be prose, and use that delineation of space to also deliver theme, to deliver character, to be the crux point between one element of drama and another element of drama in a story. It's like it just keeps turning wheels in my brain. So I'm very eager to see Calypso kind of spark a tradition of more novels in verse in genre.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was really lovely. I'm glad we got a chance to talk really quick.
I'm glad we got a chance to talk. This is rad.
And that was my Worldcon. I could talk more, so much more, but you get the idea. The only regret that I really have is that there were at least a dozen people I saw and said hey to, like in passing, and I didn't get a chance to catch up with them. And then I found online later that there were at least a dozen people who were at the con that I didn't even see. So that's just kind of the way it goes. I have a lot more thoughts about how Finnish cons, and especially panels, work, but I'm going to save those up for some other occasion. Seattle, on the whole, was really quite good. I am still feeling a bit temporally discombobulated. I had a mild but long nightmare of a trip back, and then I had to jump right back into life in the day job. But I am done with con season for now, and A Meal of Thorns will be returning to regular bookish episodes. I thank you all for listening to this report, and next time I promise it will be entirely about a book. A Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism, with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Bartra Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabrielle Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. The clip about forks was from Catherine Hardwicke's film Twilight. If you don't know the Twilight OST, what's that about? But that song in the background is Full Moon by the Black Ghost, just to cover my bases. The sidewalk audio from outside the convention center featured sounds from the Summit Sound installation, a project by the Jack Straw Cultural Center. The piece you can hear in that clip is Mole by Elizabeth McQueen, originally attributed under the name Elizabeth Schiffler. The singers for Down the Hugo Road were Nisi Shawl, K. Tempest Bradford, Cecilia Eng, Alexander James Adams, and Catherine McManaman. Thanks to our human transcribers, Kate Dollarhyde and John W.M. Thompson. They are diligently working on getting us caught up on our transcriptions. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, that is rad. A few different ways you can do that. Join our Patreon. A couple dollars a month really moves us towards our sustainability and contributor paying goals. You can hang out with us on Discord, and we've got a couple other goodies in the works. If you're interested in a book we mentioned, buying from the bookshop link in our show notes or at the ARB website gets us a cut, and it helps us immensely if you just help get the word out about the show. Leaving us a review, commenting, or sharing on your platform of choice, that really helps. And it's nice to know you're listening. Questions, suggestions, pedantic notes about things we got wrong? Drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Blue Sky for periodic skeets, I guess. Did that term stick? Next time, Zachary Gillen is joining for the long-promised/threatened episode on Jeff Vandermeer's Authority and Southern Reach. And after that, Dr. Joy Sanchez-Taylor is coming on to talk about N.K. Jemisin's The Fifth Season. That's right, I'm covering up my Hugo lost grief by really digging into the obscure titles no one has heard of. There's more good stuff on the way. Check the website if you want to read ahead. Thanks for listening, and stay critical out there.
Also, we have ranked choice voting.
Ranked choice voting.
So nice.
It's so nice. Honestly, it is one of the reasons I get excited about Hugos every year. Is it's an excuse to yell at people about ranked choice voting.
Yes.
Which is one of those it's not flashy, it's not sexy,
right.
It's hard to make a movie about, but it's
right.
probably what we need to do to save the country. It's
absolutely
not the only thing, but it's like a thing we probably have to do. Yeah. So.